Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay
This
Moore.
is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick
This
Marotta.
is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
I'm Lani Kass, and I'm so happy to be with Pete on Breaking It Down show.
And now, the Break It Down show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
I was telling the doctor as we were off mic, it's so neat to have folks like us together. You know, look, I've written some academic articles, but she's an actual academic who's written dozens of them. And our ability to talk from the very top of like advisory capacity, which she has, and my ability to advise commanders at the very bottom level, like below the tactical level. Folks like us professionally hardly ever get to talk and almost never get to record a conversation like this. And so it's really neat to be able to allow you guys all to hear this conversation that we're about to have, because we don't have to agree, but we recognize that there's this chasm, giant chasm that you can't throw a bridge across reliably, where literally we could work in the same province of Iraq or whatever and never ever talk, because we just don't have a need to, but we absolutely must understand one another and what we're doing, because our work has to relate. What are your thoughts about that, Lani?
Well, so just to correct the misperception, I'm not just an academic, I'm a practitioner. I was a major in the Israeli Air Force quite a bit of time ago, but I do have a bit of combat experience, like 3 wars, you know, of the kind that most Americans don't understand. I'm also married to a Vietnam veteran, highly decorated Vietnam vet, and the very proud mother of a United States Army cavalry officer. So I do have the practical experience. Being on the joint staff, where I spent 4 years as senior policy advisor to the chairman, who is the senior most officer in the nation, Admiral Mike Mullen, I learned from him to talk to the most junior enlisted. And actually, Admiral Mullen pissed off, can I say that on an open show? Okay. Pissed off a lot of senior NCOs and more senior officers. Every time we went to theater, Afghanistan or Iraq, he would kick out all the seniors out of the room and talk directly only to the enlisted. The other thing that he taught me is that the moment you get your first star and the key to the executive bathroom, nobody will ever tell you the truth. And therefore, you have to surround yourself with people who speak truth to power, and people who will tell you this is no shit the way this is going on. You know, not in PowerPoint presentation, but this is what is really going on. And I learned from him how very, very important it is to listen, and how fundamentally different the perspective would be from what you get in the command briefing. And even on the same firebase or post, wherever you go, you will get a fundamentally different perspective when you talk to the enlisted and when you hear the commanders. Same, by the way, on the joint staff. You know, so you learn to listen to the O5s. They tell the truth.
Yeah. And on my end of things, and I look, Dr. Kass has.
Lani, please.
Okay, Lani, tons
Lani.
of credentials, in 9 different languages. Yes, I'm an Israeli Air Force veteran, a major. I mean, there's this on and on and on. So if you have any doubts, boy, just go look up her bio and you'll
Thank
see
you.
she's deeply qualified. One of the things so I learned this fact from a guy named Major Wolf who ran a division in Afghanistan.
Mhm.
The thing is, like, I know plenty of things and I hear the briefings all the time, and I know more than these captains and I know more than these colonels
Sure.
because I have experience and I have a higher view. I get more briefings and I know more. But what I don't have enough of and never will have enough of is ground truth.
Sure.
And that was the first guy for me to say, like, if you can tell me anything, tell me what you see on the ground and don't worry about what I think about it, because I can't go out and be you on the ground. And so one of the things I did a lot, Lani, was I would just go out to wherever we did an operation and there was a PowerPoint briefing. I would just go a couple of days later and I would say, hey, what happened the other day? And then I would bring that information back to the command, and boy, they couldn't get enough of that. And that doesn't sound sexy, but when you're telling the commanders something that they don't know and it involves their success, they love it. They need it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I have very similar experiences. By the way, the other thing that I learned from Admiral Mullen, which is kind of interesting, is that PowerPoint dumbed down our ability to think in complete paragraphs.
Mm.
When you think about it, you reduce everything to bullet points. And there is a lot of story behind it. And I learned to dispense with the PowerPoint and just say, just tell me.
Yeah.
Just talk to me.
Yeah.
And way too many people, and I'm sure you have and others on this podcast have similar experiences, that people would stand there and read to you what's on the slide.
Right.
To which usually my snarky response was, you know what, brother, I knew how to read since I was 5. So, talk to me or let me read it by myself.
Right.
I don't need the bedtime story.
Yeah. If I was required to have a slide, which I would always fight, I would either bring a blank slide, or I would write all this stuff and I would say, because, this is all for the audience. This is all this code you have to say.
Right.
So I would say, allow me to orient you to my slide and I will give you 2 minutes to read it, And so I would just point at it and be like, here's my slide. And then I would just let me know when you have a question. And then I would let them read it. And these are the stuff. So the slide thing is weird. The other thing that I learned by going unit to unit to unit, because I moved around quite a bit, or the units moved over the top of me, was I would take my taskings, not from the colonel saying, I wonder about that. I would look at the slides and I'd say, we're doing all of these things. We're making these assumptions about their success, but can I find that success? Because look, yes, we're trying to, close with and destroy the enemy.
Right.
And I can certainly help with that. But the enemy doesn't want to be closed with or destroyed. And so
and he gets a vote.
Yeah, they get a vote. And if they choose to not fight you or fight you on their terms, I'm going to go show you where you're losing. And this is going to bring us to this current fight that we have going on. But I would look at the slides and go, you're making all of these assumptions about the operational success of this unit in these slides. And there's nobody checking to see if anybody's right. And this is electronic warfare, civil affairs, infantry battalions. They're all saying how they're winning. And then I would go out and be like, hey, nobody here is going to call the cops when there's a problem in Iraq. So we're teaching and training these police officers. They don't even realize this has happened.
Sure.
And then the commander would go, well, we have to figure out what to do about this. So when I know, like,
can I just say what you mentioned, because it is super important. So I taught at the National War College for 20 years. So since it's cool to say it these days, I will mention it. I was the first woman professor of military strategy and operations. Yeah.
Congratulations.
Well, thank you. So people that you know, starting with General Mattis, General Pace, General Dempsey, etc., 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 Admiral Stavridis, all the people that you see on television were my students. And I always insisted that if you're going to make assumptions, state them very clearly up front and have a way to validate those assumptions periodically. Because most plans, in my experience, have one unstated assumption, and it's exactly what you said. Assume the opponent is stupid and will cooperate with you. That is usually, most often, almost always not the case.
Yeah. I agree with you. And that's just one assumption. A lot of times, the entire, like every operation. So, and I want to make sure we clarify this too. Nobody is intending to be disingenuous or to lie. If you're an agricultural team and you go out and you talk to farmers and you offer them fruit trees, and then they say yes, you hand them to you, you are not lying by saying you did that and it was a good thing. However, that's not a good enough answer, is what Pete would say. Like, yes, you went out and did your job and you handed out some fruit trees. I went out and asked them afterwards, what did you do with the fruit trees?
Right.
Exactly.
And
what would you have rather had?
Great story? Can I tell a great story?
This is good,
Real quick. So we are in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
In this experimental farm ran by 60 plus aging happy from USAID, the International Aid Agency. And he's all about agriculture. And I said, so what kind of, this is all about getting rid of the poppies,
right?
The heroin trade, or the opium, more accurately, and substituting, something that generates income. And he goes, well, what we're going to grow here is pomegranates. And I said, wow, that's really cool. Have you ever seen a pomegranate tree? And he says, no. And I said, you know what? I come from the land of the pomegranates. And what is unique about it, it will take 7 years before it produces the first pomegranate. So you have to tend to it, water it for 7 years before you get your first tiny little bunch of pomegranates. And then what are you going to do with it? Well, we're going to make juice and ship it to the United States. It's very popular, very healthy. Yes. Well, this is in the middle of the freaking nowhere. Where are you going to put the factory that's going to make the juice, bottle the juice, ship it to the United States, refrigerate it along the way?
Right.
But, I kind of felt like telling a 5-year-old there is no Santa Claus.
Yeah.
Because, he was crestfallen. It's like you told him his baby was ugly.
Yeah.
And he had the best of intentions. It's not like he meant bad.
Right. He didn't mean bad. And if Pete shows up and starts talking, if that person's a colonel, like one step below a general.
No, he was a civilian.
I'm just saying, depending on who that person is and how much weight they carry, when Pete brings this reality at the ground level, they'll kick me off the camp. They'll never let me go on a patrol. Right. They may even kick me out of the country because I just said their baby was ugly. And there are too many of these stories, and we'll pick on ag for a moment because they
why not?
And they can take it, by the way. They can absolutely take it. So when I go to them and they're like, hey, we're going to set up these, you remember the collection centers that everybody wanted to build? I realized that no one was asking the Afghan government anything about this. They would say, we're going to build it on this day in this location. Like, hey, I thought they were the government. You're stomping on this person's authority.
Right.
And so I would start going to the governors like, hey, what do you think about this collection center? And then I would just shut up and they would say, I don't know what you're talking about. So, because that's a report right there. The governor has no idea what a collection center is. And so then I would tease that out and I would say, well, they're going to put it over here. Do you have plans for that land? Yes, I do. As a matter of fact, there's several things I'd like to, and so that's a report. And so, and these reports are just bits of information for the audience. Yeah. It's illustrating the problem of we want to go out. And so then you go up to the ag people and you say, what is the market chain from the farmer to the consumer for these pomegranates? And they're like, I don't know. You're like, well, then why are you? And I'm just going to swear, why are you fucking with it? That's what I actually said. And they're like, because I'm supposed to. That's my job, is to do this thing. So they've literally done their job, but they've not earned the right to do their job.
That's an excellent way of putting it. Because honestly, before you decide, well, pomegranates would be a great idea, and there used to be pomegranates in Afghanistan, so the climate is good for those.
Right.
But you don't have 7 years.
Right.
So that's the wrong tree, dude.
Right.
And
they do have a market chain. I worked in an area that had they had so many pomegranates, the rivers, because people there eat pomegranates, the rivers were full of pomegranate trees that were volunteers.
Right.
Where did that come from? Well, it came from human waste. And so there are pomegranate trees everywhere, right?
Right.
And they don't even harvest those ones. Those are just in the river. So part of the problem is you have this concept of what's going to work. In this case, pomegranate trees. You haven't figured out the fact that they have a familial tradition with a buyer. There's already a broker that comes around, and the broker may say, I'm buying the whole farm, or they may say, I'm going to buy these trees, and I'm going to either come back or you're going to deliver. One of the things that was great, Lani, you'll love this. I'm talking to the USAID people, maybe State Department, and they're like, yeah, we're going to build this co-op. And these people are going to co-op together, and they're going to bring their crop to market. I'm like, none of these farmers ever have a problem delivering their crop. Right. And it turned out what the farmers in this valley did was they would get together and they would cooperate and they would rent a truck for the day and fill it full of pomegranates. Sure. Another guy had an old Toyota minivan and he filled it to the very top. Like there must have been 2,000 pomegranates in this minivan.
Right.
And on top of that, he ratchet straps live sheep. So he was taking sheep and pomegranates to market in a van. So he didn't need, the other thing he didn't need is he didn't need an American paid for truck to draw attention to him as he's bringing his crop to market, because that's how you get your neck cut out there. All of these things create problems that are very difficult to see because, again, the ag team's like, well, we're giving out these things. We're creating this marketplace for pomegranate farmers, but they don't want it, understand it. It steps on the government, which ultimately, that's our ultimate goal, right? If we can leave, if we can make the government stable, but we never could do that.
Sure. I don't know if you can see, I see somebody chimed in, Brad Hutchings, saying, well, to be fair, they did end up having 20 years. True, Brad, but this was in 2011. So then we didn't have, but we didn't know how much time we would have.
Yeah, and actually, the story I'm telling you is also from 2011, where we have all these programs that were doomed to fail because they weren't grounded in reality. And in the YAG team's defense, they weren't trained to do this job. They had agricultural skill, but to go stabilize a government and use agriculture as a means of doing it, those people weren't trained to do that. They did go qualify on their weapon. They did learn how to do combat lifesaver. They learned how to do a 9-line medevac. They learned all these other things, but they didn't learn how to market assess an area and then bring a unique solution for that area.
Well, this guy was a civilian, one of the very few. You see, we're not here to talk about Afghanistan, but it's important to bring up. You know, President Bush said the nation is at war. That was BS. Not even the U.S. government was at war. The nation was at the mall. The United States government stayed in its offices. The military was at war. So we had way too few civilians who actually knew how to run a city, how to run a water system, how to run, a market supply chain, how to raise pomegranate trees. And it all defaulted to the military. So this guy that I'm mentioning happened to be about 60 years old, and he was literally from the Department of Agriculture. So God bless him, he spent a year in Afghanistan, but that was the 1 year that he was there. So whatever he planted, be it pomegranate or whatever produces a crop within a year, he wasn't there, to collect what he has done. So these year-long tours, caused us to fight a 20-year war, 1 year at a time, not any different than my husband told me Vietnam was. 1 tour at a time.
Yeah. And I'm going to make it worse than that, because not only is it 21-year wars, you never work. And so you're never trained for the job you're going to do.
Right.
And you never work that job again. So you come and you work in so you have this institutional amnesia and incapacity just repeated 20 years over and over again. And because I stayed in areas, I would talk to our partners and they would say, you guys just say the same things over and over again and nothing ever gets done.
Right.
And you could tell the unit, and they're like, well, we're going to be different. Like, okay, great. Here's what you're going to do. Stop doing stuff.
Right.
Do things right this entire tour, but they're so desperate to do the right thing, they never get a chance to do
you
it.
Want to do the right thing. I mean, everybody, I believe everybody is well-intended unless proven otherwise.
Right.
So my going in assumption, Pete, and I just meet you first time, you're a good person and you mean well.
Right.
Until you prove me otherwise, I'm going to assume that you're well-intended. So there is no, it wasn't bad intent on anybody's part. Sometimes it was overzealous. I'll give you another example. And again, I don't mean to talk about Afghanistan. So we went to visit a partner unit from a NATO country that shall remain nameless for good reasons. And they showed us around, and they had a Kandak, an Afghani battalion that they were training with them. And obviously I'm the only woman, as I'm the only woman in most homes that I've ever been at, or most events. She's fluent in Russian, so we're speaking Russian and we're having a great time. And then he decides to go introduce me to every officer in his Kandak. And he wants me to shake hands with them. Well, I always wore a scarf around my neck. I cover my head, and I don't shake a hand unless a hand is extended to me. But again, his intent was good. His intent was wonderful, but he was violating their culture. So just a quick story on that.
And I want to talk about Russia and Ukraine, but I have to mention what you're saying now. We were so ill prepared for the culture. One of the things that I've learned from, there's this lady who I learned a ton from. Maybe you've heard of her name. Benedicte Grima. And she's an ethnographer who spent 20 plus years in Pashtunistan.
Right.
And one of the things she's like, females so infrequently use their names over
Right.
the years, they lose their name. They don't. And this is a secretive part of who they are. And it's the same thing for the men. They will use a nickname, Abu something or whatever. But for the most part, they don't use first names. And I never heard that until I read this lady's book. And I've read almost all of her books for years. And I've only just now learned this. This is how complicated this stuff is,
Well,
you know, yeah.
It is and it isn't. So, I was born in Poland. I grew up in Israel, and I'm an American citizen by choice rather than birth. So I knew the naming convention, and it's not a nickname, Abu or It's the father of or the mother of.
Right.
So you are known as the mother or father of your children. And for example, in Israel, even though it's not an Arabic culture, being in the Middle East, you adapt it. So when you talk to your child and you talk to your friends' parents, you don't call them by their first or last name. You don't say Pete, you don't say Mr. Turner.
Right.
You say the father of or the mother of. It's just a polite way of interacting with adults. So I actually knew that, cross-cultural training is an interesting thing because it applies things that you wouldn't even think apply to a multitude of cultures.
Yeah, no, for sure. All right, we're talking about Russia and Ukraine now.
Oh, you got it.
Okay, so one of the things that we've discussed is how ill-prepared a military can be to go accomplish their mission, right?
Right.
Everybody loves a picture of a tank shooting around and flying over a berm and all that stuff. But then reality hits, and you actually have to put humans out ahead of supplies.
Yep.
And it just gets really damn tough. And then if you meet unexpected resistance, if your equipment isn't up to the task, it gets really, really hard. Yeah. So let's talk about what's happened and why do you think, or let's just talk about Russia and Ukraine however you want, because I know you've got specific ideas.
Well, I mean, I let you ask questions since you're asking good questions, and maybe we can get some questions from the audience.
Well, one of the things we discussed before is we've been studying Russia for 70 plus years, writing PhD papers, building entire careers. And so everybody's baby.
Me.
Yeah. Right. Everybody's got a baby. And here's my baby. Here's what's going to happen. And so there's a lot of predictions, again, that are well meant. But because everybody's so invested in their thing, has that impacted our ability to deal with this as this approached and now that it's happened?
Without a shadow of a doubt. Without a shadow of a doubt. So we all started with, like you always do, with a set of stated and unstated assumptions. And they weren't pulled out of our respective asses. They were based on intelligence assessments that we all read. Some had the opportunity to read them classified, like I did, but a lot of it was open. You have DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, assessment of Russian military power. It's a public document. You have congressional testimonies, by senior officer and intelligence officials. So we all made assumptions how it's going to go based on that intelligence. So my own personal assumption was that the Russians are going to be on the east bank of the Dnieper River, which bisects Kiev. We don't have a map here, runs all the way to the Black Sea. But that's essentially the Russian-speaking Eastern Ukraine. Kharkov or Kharkiv, depending which language you want to speak.
Right.
Let's call it Kharkiv since it's Ukraine, is a major city there. So my assumption was they're going to bypass the cities, make a thunder run, and stop at the bank of the river, and basically said, "Hi there, here we are, surrender now." Not what happened. And it's funny because on the first night of the war, when CNN was giving you live coverage of the explosions over Kiev, a friend of mine texted me, "The shock and awe started." And I texted back, "That's not Russian shock and awe. Wait an hour." Because it was so, how shall I say, paltry, minimal. If you look at the opening night of Desert Storm, if you look at the opening night of Iraqi freedom, even if you look at the opening night of Baghdad or Serbia, we shot more cruise missiles than the Russians shot in almost a month of war, and more aircraft sorties. Well, that shock and awe never materialized. They never gained air superiority. And my biggest surprise, Charlie, was that the Russians did not take Ukrainian radio and TV and internet off the air. And the moment they did not, the Ukrainians started winning the information war. And right now, all you know about what is happening is what the Ukrainians are telling you. Now, I'll give you a good example. This is not uncommon, and here was my other surprise. So I'm old, in case nobody realizes here. I was in the military in 1967, in the Israeli military. I remember the 6-Day War.
Yeah.
Which kind of looked like, massing of troops on somebody's borders. The Egyptians, the Syrians, and the Jordanians for over a couple of months massed on Israel's borders. And Israel waited and then preempted. And on the first and second day of the war, now the war was over in 6 days, but on the first and second day of the war, Radio Cairo was broadcasting that Israeli pilots were falling out of the sky like flies, and Egyptian tanks are on the outskirts of Tel Aviv. The Israeli media did not correct it. And to the point that some civilians actually panicked because, you could listen, and most people in Israel speak Arabic, you could listen to the Arabic broadcasts, and some of them were in Hebrew for propaganda purposes, and some people really panicked. And it wasn't till the third day that the full scope of the victory became apparent. So I honestly thought it's like that. We are all products of our experience.
Right.
It's clearly not like that. It's not the 6-Day War by far. It looks more like the 76 war from the Israeli perspective. It was horrible because it was a surprise attack. Fortunately, there was a huge buffer of territories occupied in 67, so civilians were not in danger. And you could fight and take the fight quickly to the enemy. But I'm here to tell you the vaunted IDF, of which I was a part, which 6 years ago, or 6 years before 73, won in 6 days, was fighting for its survival 6 years later, taking huge casualties. I mean, Israel lost 5,000 people, all military casualties, 30% officers in less than 3 weeks. If you prorate it to the size of the population, it's the equivalent of the United States losing 500,000 people in 3 weeks.
Yeah. That's crazy.
Ultimately, we won, right?
Right.
But it wasn't pretty or easy or like we expected because nobody trained to fight on the defense. The entire doctrine was go on the offense, take the fight to the enemy, move fast. You don't want to occupy territory, just, shock and awe and move fast.
Yeah.
You couldn't do it when you were attacked. And taking off from a cratered runway is not something that the Israeli Air Force trained for. Now, you had like 2 questions that...
I know. Well, I want to say something because my questions come first before that.
Of course. It's your
One
show.
of the other aspects about the Israeli conflict is that, and I think I'm glad you brought this up because it's a parallel. I definitely see a lot of similarities. But the Sinai wasn't given back to Egypt until 1979. So there was still this was a decade plus long thing before it reached a sustainable peace, right? So it wasn't like it was all buttercups and daisies.
No,
from
but
76.
it was a ceasefire.
Right. Which, there's a lot of ceasefires out there that have held. But in this region, boy, ceasefires are tenuous.
Right.
So we may see Odessa be held by Russia for the foreseeable future. That may be part of what happens, and it'll take some other person down the road as an exterior body to say, "Hey, let's demilitarize." And I'm just freestyling here about the Crimea or whatever it is, but these conflicts are like that, where we may see a significant change in the internationally recognized borders to get this peace. And as much as we're all taught to hate Russia right now as part of the information operations, the reality is that there's going to be money and stuff going in their direction to get them to stop fighting.
Well, let's put it this way.
Okay.
Somebody ought to call for a ceasefire. You're talking about millions of refugees. Who knows how many civilian casualties?
Right.
I don't believe any of the numbers you get in open sources. I just don't.
Right. Yeah.
Because they're overinflated and you hear it only from a Ukrainian perspective. So I automatically cut it down by 50%. And I'm still probably on the high side.
Sure.
So they supposedly, allegedly, killed 5 Russian, per US media, major generals. Well, no. In Russia, in the Russian military structure, General Mayor, translated as Major General, is a 1-star. Okay, so the only thing that you can say, they leading from the front, which normally would be a good thing.
Yeah.
And their military doesn't have as large an NCO class as ours. So in terms of function, what you actually do, I would say a brigadier general does the job of a colonel. If you want to compare
Right.
apples to apples. If you want to compare it to the Israeli military, right, which has one 3-star and he's the chief.
Yeah.
Three stars and they the service chiefs, and everybody is a 2-star. A major is an 06 equivalent in terms of the functions. So it's important, but it's stupid because it shows you a picture with somebody with 1 star on the epaulette and you call him a major general. Well, he ain't. He's just as dead, and I'm sure his parents mourn him and his wife and children, but he is just a brigadier general. So let's not exaggerate the successes.
And let's also understand, too, that how the Russian system works, there's not a lot of trust that's pushed down to the lowest level. So to get things done, you have to be a little rank heavy. Yeah.
That is true with one caveat.
Okay.
It depends on the unit. And not dissimilar from the United States. So if you take the Tier 1 special ops guys, there is a lot of trust and confidence in those units.
Sure.
And a lot of the ops are done by senior NCOs and junior officers. If you're talking your basic infantry and armor, yeah, what you're saying is very true.
And it makes it tough it makes it easier to kill generals, but they're also built to backfill a general.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
not trying to say this is easy, but yeah, when they say they're losing generals, that's because, like you said, they're doing the job of a lieutenant colonel or, right around that.
And the Ukrainians are hunting them.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. And, you've been on a battlefield, so which is the command vehicle. It's
Right.
the one with the antennas.
Yeah. Too many radios.
Not rocket science.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to get to this question here because I think we can shed some light. I've had some serious concerns. Ukraine is a trap designed to get the West to send our weaponry to Ukraine, thereby draining us here in Europe of our defenses for a full-scale invasion of Europa.
Okay, great question. So here's the way I would put it. Okay, agree overall, but I do not believe Putin has any intention, and I speak as a school-trained Sovietologist, Russia expert, fluent in the language, and I studied the Russian military for 40 years. Doesn't mean I'm 100% correct, but I think I know what I'm talking about. I do not believe Russia has any intent to occupy the rest of Europe. This is not Hitler 1936. I mean, it's a false analogy. It's an analogy that came from Ukrainian propaganda, but I believe it's a false analogy. So Putin wants to not even reconstitute the Soviet Union. He wants to be Peter the Great. He wants to be Catherine the Great. His mindset is Russian nationalist. He is not a communist by any stretch of the imagination. So I do not think that their designs go beyond Ukraine, perhaps Moldova, and that's it.
Yeah.
Now,
Go ahead.
the essence of the question, and it's a really good question. When you look at the pictures on TV, and that's all I can see right now, right? I don't have the access I had before, and if I did, I couldn't talk about it. I have not seen a single top of the line anything. Not a tank, not an APC, nothing. I mean, I just didn't see it. It doesn't mean it ain't there. But what you see burning and pulled off the side of the road is all circa 1970 equipment. So again, my initial assessment, proven wrong, but not because I was totally wrong, is that the Russians are going to put their second tier equipment to have the Ukrainians expand the limited supply of javelins and modern anti-tank weapons on that, and then bring in the top of the line equipment. What they miscalculated, obviously, is that the United States and the rest of NATO is going to shower Ukraine in javelins, to the point that the Ukrainians are calling it Saint Javelin. And the same with the Stingers. You do not, the couple of days ago over the weekend, when they allegedly used the hypersonic missile, that would be the first time in a month that I have seen anything new. And again, I'm saying what I see, doesn't mean it's not there.
Yeah.
They don't seem to put to risk putting the top of the line equipment into the fight. And mind you, in the Russian military structure, not dissimilar to the US structure, the top equipment goes to the top units. So they didn't put in their best units or their best equipment. How do you know it's the best unit? There is a really simple clue. The best units in the Russian army have the prefix Guards unit. So, of course, American media immediately decided it's National Guard, which is bullshit. It's Guards is a designation from World War II. It's a heroic unit. It's an elite unit. Like the 101st or the 82nd elite unit. Don't have too many of those in Ukraine. So that leads you to the question, okay, and I'm trying to answer a really good question. So you're playing in the Super Bowl. Why do you put your third string and your injured reserve into the opening quarter? So that kind of leads to, okay, what else do they have in mind? And it's not the occupation of Ukrainian cities. Cities suck infantry. It's like a vacuum cleaner.
Yeah.
Think about it. The standard, and you know that as well as I do, the standard is 3-1 on the offense.
Yeah.
The Russians are on the offense. They put about 160,000 troops against a regular army, not counting the militias and the volunteers, of about that size. So it's 1-to-1 ratio on the offense. Now, who is planning this? And then for urban warfare, as you know, the doctrine is between 6 to 10 to 1 inhabitant in urban warfare. And the Russians don't have nearly enough. That's why they are reducing the cities to rubble.
There's a couple things I want to add to what you're talking about.
Sure.
One of the things is Russia just isn't that big. The economy isn't that big. Look, physically, yeah, it's massive, but that also means
11 time zones.
yeah, they have other neighbors they've got to worry about, so they can't just slide all in and go for Europe because of a couple of things. One, they've got about 1 million person army, and it takes the numbers for support to forward deploy person. Let's say it's 10 to 1. So that means they've got 100,000 people-ish that they've got to deal with. And all of a sudden, when you lose whatever that number is, let's say it's 15% of those 100,000,
Right.
it's really hard to get people.
Oh, sure.
So they're struggling to move material. They're struggling to feed. And I was talking with John Spencer about, and Xander Bullock too, about how like there's a general somewhere in the Russian army in charge of all the lubricants, all
Right.
of the things that keep machines moving.
Sure.
And that person's got too much of something, not enough of another, and they can't. That's always a problem. And now that you've got stuff breaking in the field, oh my God, it becomes really, really hard. So the ability to force project into, so and then if you look at this another way, there are about 60 million people in Italy, and there's about 60 million people in France, and that's roughly the size of the population of Russia. You throw in Austria and Switzerland, and you got it covered.
It's a little bigger.
Right.
Bigger. It's
You're not gonna-
160 million.
Right. Okay, so 160 million. You're still not going to see, like, you wouldn't worry too much about France and Italy taking over all of Europe. They just don't have the size and capacity to do it. I believe that the same is true for Russia.
Germany did.
I'm not a Russian expert.
Germany did.
Well, yes, they did. Yes, they did. They had a different level. They played a different game, though, right?
Yes.
They acted differently.
Sure. And I honestly expected a blitzkrieg, a lightning war, which is the way we fought, in Iraq too. But remember, even in Iraq too, I'll never forget it. It's day 4 of the war in Iraqi freedom, 2003. Front page headline in the New York Times: U.S. forces stuck in a quagmire.
Yeah.
And you kind of go, come on, dude, it's day 3.
Yeah.
But here's another perspective to think about. Serbia, we don't talk a lot about it. Operation Allied Force 1999. Where it took the United States and NATO 78 days to pound a tiny, isolated country whom nobody was helping. We pounded it into submission for 78 days. And if you look at the pictures from Belgrade, you know what? They don't look much better than the pictures from Kiev.
Yeah.
Even though our rules of engagement were much more restrictive, we try to avoid collateral damage. We don't always succeed. But war is ugly.
Yeah.
It's not a video game. And, what kind of pisses me off, and that's why I'm enjoying talking to you, because you know what you're talking about. You have so many armchair strategists. Well, this should be done and we should do this and this should be done. And, why don't we just shoot a Russian ship and blah, blah, blah. You know what? I don't want my son fighting in World War III, and neither do you.
Yeah. And if we're going to look at, I think the Serbian overall conflicts is a great proxy for this to kind of say, what does modern European war look like? And we realized that the moment Tito died, conflict started.
Right. And it all collapsed. And you had a founding member of the United Nations collapse.
Right.
You had a war that continued from 92 till the Dayton Accords. So that's late 99, if not 2000. And from what I am reading, it's about to restart. Because people see, and that's the other thing. In the United States, and as an American by choice, I get to say that Americans are optimists by nature and have absolutely no historic perspective. So what happened yesterday is in the rear view mirror. Get over it. We're moving forward. This is extremely endearing and a great quality. This is not how most other human beings think. Conflicts in Europe, in the Middle East, go back centuries.
That's right.
Generations. And you talk to anybody overseas, Russia being a great example, but Serbia being another good example. The Crusades were yesterday. World War II was yesterday. World War I was yesterday.
Yeah.
In the United States, you say Desert Storm, people go, what?
Yeah.
That's 30 years ago, So, and I'm not criticizing, I'm just pointing to a cultural distinction of which, as an American by choice, I am aware most Americans are not.
Mm.
You had a question, somebody was asking about 10%. I couldn't read it fast enough. Yeah.
10% of Russian forces are deployed in Ukraine with seeming outsized ratio of Russian conscripts being used. Where are the rest of them? Suwalki Gap in Belarus sector. Yes. And now opened Russian owns, now that Russia basically owns Belarus. So, yeah. And Rus is in the title. So,
yes,
they are aligned.
All it means is white Russian.
And I love
Ukraine means the borderlands, literally, that's the name, a translation of the name, the borderlands, or it used to be Kievan Rus. So the word RUS was in the name too, depending how far in history you want to go. Kiev is the birthplace of Russia. So whoever is asking this question is spot on. I don't know how many conscripts are deployed in Ukraine. And the short answer is nobody knows. Okay? Russia, over the last 20 years, has been moving into a more professional military, not an all-volunteer force like we have. Very few countries have that. Again, the vaunted IDF is draftees, is conscription force. You volunteer to become officer, but it's a conscription military in Israel. So, honest to God, nobody knows what is the percentage of conscripts to what is called contract soldiers. Contract soldiers are professional NCOs, and they sign like enlistment for a period of time. They get paid. Conscription now in Russia is only for 1 year. Okay, so you have a 1 year troop. Okay, what did you know 1 year in the military?
Nothing. I wasn't even done training.
Nothing. So I mean, seriously. But Ukrainian propaganda is it's all conscripts.
Right.
I don't know that to be a fact. A little known factoid is Russian law forbids sending conscripts on operations overseas. Now, Putin called it a special military operation. Does he consider Ukraine to be overseas? But if so, given it's a sovereign country, using conscripts would be illegal by Russian law.
Interesting.
Just an interesting factoid.
Yeah.
Now, let's stay on this question because the question was excellent. The Souvlaki Gap, and specifically Poland. Again, I wish we had a map, but everybody can look at the map on their computer. People just don't study geography, which is part of the problem. The Souvlaki Gap is very close to a Russian enclave in Poland called Kaliningrad, and it's right on the water. And the area around it going to the Ukrainian border is called the Souvlaki Gap. Great tank country, totally open terrain. Kaliningrad is a heavily militarized Russian enclave. About 500,000 troops just in that fairly small area, to include nuclear weapons. So you want to know why Poland didn't want to send its MiG-29s to Ukraine? Because they can read a map.
I'm going to put a picture of the map up here real quick, and then I want to ask you a couple of other questions on this, because at some point we have to build off ramps, right? And we can't get only our way. They're going to be able to have the ability to have some influence on how this goes, and I'm assuming that Russia is going to not come out the victor in this whole thing. So I guess my question is when we look at NATO involvement, a lot of people are talking about that. If you're gonna, okay, here's a good example, right? I believe it's NATO, and I could be wrong on this. NATO started operating in Macedonia in the mid-90s. The unit I was in Germany, we'd send a team down to Macedonia.
Macedonia is now a member.
Right, and so Macedonia was like the beginning of this NATO era. And then my unit then deployed to Bosnia as a part of a NATO mission to go down. And when we first deployed, it was like, hey, President Clinton's got 30 days authorization to send these troops there. Right. And as we get there, we get to Lukovac, and they're like, yeah, we've got a 30-year lease.
Right.
There are still troops all over the former Yugoslavian states that are there. So when we look at NATO and bringing
peacekeepers in Kosovo.
Yeah, right. This NATO would never leave, and the partnered countries would never leave if they came to Ukraine, right? And so Russia has to be like, hey, you cannot have, right? There's no way they want that. We wouldn't want that in Canada. Like, you're going to have how many? Right. We would hate that. So
Right.
we have to accept that whatever happens with NATO, an extended presence is going to continue to be a problem for the rest of our
Absolutely.
lives
Yeah.
if they stay.
But if anybody was asking for my advice,
Yes.
if you put NATO into Ukraine in the air or on the ground, you are in WW3.
Mm.
You're coming in as a combatant against the Russians. So what do you think the Russians are going to do?
Well, they sure as hell aren't going to like it.
Right.
That's for sure.
You know, and I mean, you have people online saying, oh, yeah, let's go kick Putin's ass. Well, I'm all about kicking ass and taking names. This is not a country with over 6,000 nuclear weapons,
Yeah.
which can destroy the United States in 30 minutes. Russia is the only country on the planet that can destroy the United States in 30 minutes. I am not recommending fighting Russia.
Yeah.
By any stretch of the imagination. Now, if they attack a NATO member, oh, good.
Yeah. Here's that picture. I'll pull this up, man.
But right there in black, you can see the Slovaki gap, and you can see Poland, and you can see Belarus. So, yeah, that will give the Russians a land bridge to their enclave, which otherwise is surrounded by NATO on all sides on land and can be resupplied by sea. So if you look at this map, you'll understand why the Poles said, hey, we'll be very happy to deliver free of charge, to deliver the MiG-29 to Ramstein, a NATO base on German territory. You take care of that from there.
Mm.
And all of a sudden, the United States goes, never mind. I mean, if you look at it from the Polish perspective and based on the map that you just saw, I mean, it's a no-brainer. Are you going to risk nuclear weapons on your territory because you send MiG-29s to shoot down Russian pilots? I mean, you have to be, some people truly don't consider an issue in its many permutations. Pete, you know that any plan, you have to say, okay, let's do that. What next?
What's next? Yeah.
And what if? And how do you end this?
Mm.
And if you're not asking these questions, you're getting us into an endless war. The difference, again, being it's an endless war with a country that can destroy our country completely. Afghanistan couldn't do that. Serbia couldn't do that. Even Germany couldn't do that.
Yeah.
But Russia can.
You don't have to ask this question, but I have to ask it.
Please.
Personally, I have watched the Biden administration, all the people involved, struggle to get things done. Joe Biden has a habit of saying, hey, they had a deal. I couldn't convince them. What am I going to do?
Sure.
He failed in Iraq. All of that crew failed in Syria. They failed in Libya. So there's a lot of failure involved in this. And if we are going to play the role of the hegemonic leader, the world's, cop, or, we'll have a Yalta conference of some kind or another.
The world's Messiah.
Yeah. So do we, do we have confidence in this crew and their ability to bring peace in this conflict in some way that doesn't blow up on our faces? And would any crew be able to do that? And that kind of makes the question more fair. You know, whether you want Donald Trump or Obama or President Bush the Elder, is this a diplomatic? I just don't have confidence in our folks who have screwed up over and over again. Arab Spring, oops, we dropped the ball. What is our level of confidence in there being a U.S.-led diplomatic solution? No.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. It does. And I'm not trying to be unfair. These folks wanted the job, they got it, and now they get.
Again, it is a difficult situation.
Right.
Okay. But, you know, as Arnold Mullen used to say, if it was easy, I wouldn't need you.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that's why you're getting paid the big bucks.
Right.
Okay. So all issues at this level, you know, at the level I used to work at, they don't come to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs unless they're really difficult and really complex.
Yeah.
You know, and we tried everything at the lower level and it didn't work.
Right.
So I am not minimizing, and I'm not saying that anybody else should have had a magic wand.
Right.
What I would say, with a very straight face and totally apolitical, because the way I vote, you know, the fact that I'm a card-carrying Republican is my freaking business, but I am apolitical.
Yeah.
The time to have done smart things was before the 24th of February, before the invasion happened. And we sat like deer in the headlights. It's like, you know, the accident is about to happen, and you're like, okay, is he really going to invade? And you go, wait a second, who puts 150,000 troops in -4 temperature for months on end if you're not planning to do anything with it? I mean,
yeah.
So the time for deterrence is past. The time now is to de-escalate, give your opponent a line to retreat, because otherwise a cornered, wounded animal will fight you to the death.
One last question. That's such a great line. I want to end it there, but I have one more question. So,
not mine.
Yes.
A Chinese philosopher named Sun Tzu said that 5,000 years ago.
Do we see in the next 90 days offensive operations against Russia, whether it's Ukrainian led or it's, you know, look, I'm not going to put you on the spot to say this, but we don't have CIA and Delta Force people to sit in Kansas and do nothing, right? So those folks are doing something. So are we going to see an offense?
You figured that one out. Shocking. There is gambling happening here.
Yeah. So do you think that we'll see an offensive push to create incentives for Russia to start cooperating? Because again, you start destroying a couple of factories and it gets really tough. You go bomb a couple of insignificant, airstrips. You know, it starts to it becomes a bigger
World War III. See, and here is the thing: the Russians, because of their World War II experience. And remember how long they have been at war. You know, we landed at Normandy, wasn't very pretty, But our war, at least in Europe, lasted just a little over a year.
Yeah.
The Russians lost 20 million people. Military, 20 million people. They take war much more seriously than we do. The American tendency is to look at war as a sport. It's a game.
I love it.
We have our team, go Ukraine. You know, it's like, I have to say that, and I absolutely have to say that, Pete.
Yeah.
People who obviously mean very well and don't speak the language, to their signature blocks on email and on social media, Slava Ukrainie, Slava Geroyam.
Yeah.
Glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. Little do they know, this slogan dates back to 1917 and to one of the worst Nazi, fascist, anti-Semitic leader that Ukraine had. A dude by the name of Bandera. So when Zelensky says that, he is tapping into something very primordial, very primeval, very ingrained in the soul of the people. By the way, throughout the existence of the Soviet Union, that phrase was banned. It's offensive to Jews, it's offensive to Poles, it's offensive to Russians. It's pure Nazi slogan, not neo-Nazi. There is nothing neo about it. It's Nazi. You have the Azov Brigade. Only war for yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Awesome.
Smart dude. Smart dude. Have him on the show. Really smart dude. Both the question and the comment were shown. So, you know, not unusual to appeal to history when you're trying to galvanize people against an overwhelming opponent.
Yeah.
You know, in World War II, atheist communist Stalin made common cause with the church in Russia. But as opposed to in the United States, when President Bush, after 9/11, said, go shopping.
Yeah.
Everything is fine. Russians take war super serious and super personal. So long about way, do not cross the Russian border in the eastern direction.
I love it. All right, let me wrap this thing up. I mean, we've done this for, are you ready? An hour and 20 minutes.
Oh my God. I didn't look at my watch. And the website doesn't show time.
Yeah.
So it seems like 20 minutes.
I know. You did such a good job. And Lani's going to be on again in a couple of weeks. We're going to talk more just like academic.
Sure.
Super interesting, right?
Thank you.
All right, stand by for 1 second. Thank you very much.